Last year was my first time diving into the romantasy genre, and I found some fantastic new books. However, 2025 had so many releases that obviously I didn't get to all of them. Going into February, the month of love and romance, it seems like the perfect time to grab those highly anticipated romantasies from last year off my shelves and see if I can find a couple of new 5-star favourites. I'd love to know what you thought of these books if you've read them, and if you didn't, which books you were maybe interested in picking up. My tentative TBR for this particular blog is going to be Rachel Gillig's The Night and the Moth, The Everlasting by Alix Harrow, and Shield of Sparrows by Devney. That one I think I'm going to try and read by an audiobook because it is chunky. I've heard so many good things about them all. I can't wait to see if I'm going to fall in love with them too. This is one of those updates where I'm not sure I'm going to include it, but I'm going to film it anyway. I don't have my physical copy with me right now, but I have just started The Everlasting by Alix Harrow. I picked this one at random out of the 3 books, and partly because I thought it looked like the shortest, and partly because Alix Harrow is the only author in my little trio stack that I've read from before. I was not a fan of Starling House, though I did finish it. And then I think I read The Knight and the Butcher Bird, and I preferred that to Starling House. I enjoyed it while I was in it, but I don't know that I was completely sold. But this one I have such high hopes for. It's already surprised me. I had assumed it sat somewhere similar to The Night and the Moth, which obviously that could also surprise me, but I had in my head a either fantasy world setting, maybe a quasi-medieval setting, and some kind of Arthurian retelling. And none of that's wrong, but it's also not right, and I think I figured that out about page 7 when we suddenly had telegrams coming through. We're hearing snippets of a kind of folklore tale about Sir Una the Undying, who seems to be quite a King Arthur type character, you know, the noble orphan that has the legendary sword that rises up and defends the realm in their time of need. She is now, in our current day, being used as a kind of propaganda tool, a kind of a motivation to encourage the soldiers that are fighting in the current war. Into this we have our scholar character, Owen Mallory, and I think he is the son of a deserter. He's been a soldier, he's now an academic. He doesn't really seem to have that much going for him. He's struggling, and he is presented, or he finds it's delivered to him, this manuscript that is almost mythical, it's legendary. The manuscript itself is a fairy tale, and that's the original text of this Una the Undying. That's all I've got to, and I have started peeking at summaries and reviews, and I think that we're going to be doing a kind of time slip, lots and lots of yearning romance between Una and Owen. I'm struggling. I think I'm around about page 30, which is probably under 10%. And the book's just more complicated, or more, it makes me feel like I need to be smarter, if I'm honest. The first part with Una's story was very folklory, very fairy tale-y, and then when we slipped into Owen's POV, it feels like he's talking to the reader, but I actually think he's talking to Una, and it's a little bit convoluted, and I don't know how I feel about it. Looking at the reviews, it does seem to get really good reviews, and the reviews that are really good reviews are going, you know, it's a work of art and it's so smart. I definitely think it's one of those ones that I will need to give a solid chance, but I'm also very aware that this year, as with every year, my early kind of goals are I'm not going to spend days and days reading books where I should have DNF'd them early on. So I don't want to get caught up in that because Alix Harrow and I maybe don't click, but I want to love this one. I really, really want to love this one. So I spoke to a few people in Discord. There's people who were like me, were like, I didn't love Starling House and I didn't love this. And then there's people who loved the book. But I think the strategy I've been recommending seems to be that I have to give it to maybe the end of part 1, which, looking at my book, I think means maybe around about page 50. and then I'm going to see how it goes from there. It's not a massively long book in terms of page count, but I think it's going to take me a while to read through it because I suspect I'm going to have to go back and reread things. In fact, I might go back and start from the beginning now and see how I get on. I wasn't planning on having a midway check-in with this book because I thought it would be a fairly quick read, but I will either get back to you when I finish it, or if I decide to DNF, I'll check in with you then. I've managed to get a copy of the audiobook of The Everlasting through my library's app, and I had a listen to the first couple of chapters or the first couple of sections, the introduction to Una and Owen, last night. I think I'm going to prefer listening to it than reading it physically. At least that's what I'm hoping, and that's what I'm going to try in this kind of second attempt, and we'll see how I get on. I'm very happy to announce that picking up the audiobook for The Everlasting made all the difference, and it really won me over. I'm not saying that it's quite up there at that 5-star rating level, but it's definitely hitting somewhere around the 4 mark, which, since I was considering DNFing, is a vast improvement. As a complete aside, I really love the cover for this book, and I think it would be even cooler if this kind of sword, where we can just see a face through, was one of those peekaboo covers. That would just be so cool. Anyway, it was definitely a slow burn in terms of the romance, yes, but also just in terms of getting me into that story. It was a little confusing at first. I wasn't sure how I felt about the time loop, the repetition, but I enjoyed how it came together. While I can't say that this is a new all-time favourite book, there's something about it that I definitely think is going to stick with me. I don't know that I ever really came to adore Una and Owen as characters. I don't know that I was ever completely, immersed in their romance. There was always just a little bit of a distance, I guess, between me as a reader and them. I don't know if that's just me, or maybe if that's Sparrows' writing style, but I didn't feel like I was fully immersed in them and their troubles as would maybe have got me to that 5-star rating. But I definitely think it's one that I'm gonna mull over and one I'm gonna come back to and kind of reflect on. I think this is a hard one to classify when it comes to that idea of romantasies, because this technically is definitely a romantasy. The romance is as much a part of the plot as the time travel, as the magical elements. The whole story revolves around this romance and the plot falls apart if we don't have it. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like what I usually see marketed as romantasy. I don't know whether it just didn't have the drama that I associate with romantasy. There's definitely a lot of yearning, there's a lot of devotion between Una and Mallory. Maybe because they're slightly older characters, which I loved that they felt like grown-ups, not teenagers that we were being told were older. These felt like adults. And I don't know whether that just made them a little more stoic, a little more grounded, and the romance played out much more subtly. It didn't feel like it was full of big dramatic moments or big declarations. They were both very clearly falling for each other, but something just felt different in it. It didn't feel as fantastical in the romance sense. Don't know if this was a vlog about trying romantasy I missed last year, that I would class this as romantasy, but I also don't think it can come under anything else. Let me know if you've read it. Well, would you class this as a romantasy? And if not, how would you categorize it? Next book that I'm going to pick up is The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. I'm hoping I can get a library copy, and if not, I will read it on my Kindle. This is Rachel Gillig's, I think, second kind of series. She already has out One Dark Window and Two Twisted Crowns, which I do have on my shelf and I have not read. But this one looks really good, and I've seen so much hype around it that I'm gonna read this one now, and I can always go back to One Dark Window eventually. But this one just sounds really exciting and really interesting. So, funnily enough, it's obviously going to have that connection to The Everlasting in that we have stories that feature knights. I think they're both vaguely historical in their fantasy worlds. But other than that, and other than this gorgeous, gorgeous cover. I really don't know anything else about this book other than that it has been the Romantasy darling of the year, and so I want to give it a try. Guys, I thought we were going to be in for a real problem. I thought that The Night and the Moth was maybe going to go the same way as I thought The Everlasting was going to go at the start. It really throws you into the world and really doesn't give you a lot of explanation or a lot of time to find your footing. And I honestly, again, considered DNFing this one right at the start. At the moment though, I've just passed either the quarter mark or the third mark, and I'm fully invested. Funnily enough though, I'm not actually invested in the romance, I don't think. We have met our lead female character and the one I assume to be our lead male character and romantic interest, but honestly, if you told me that they weren't the romantic leads of this book, I would believe you. There is a little bit of that kind of enemies to lovers, I don't even know what we call it, enemies, disliking each other to lovers kind of vibe going on, but I don't know, it doesn't feel that important. I am, however, completely invested in the mystery of what is going on. This follows a group of foundlings who work, I guess, at an abbey as diviners. So people will come to them with their queries, and these women will take turns in sort of dreaming the future for them. They interpret the signs that they see as to whether the omens are favoured by the gods. These people's futures are favoured by the gods. We have 6 diviners at the start. Their past lives are meant to have been taken from them when they joined this abbey, so they don't have names, but we are following 6, who is the abbess's favourite. She seems to be the best at pertaining the future, and the story seems to kick off when the newly crowned king comes to get his fortune told. His divining doesn't go brilliantly, and 6 kind of tells him that his reign is not looked upon favourably. At that point she meets his whole kind of cadre of knights, and one in particular she has an antagonistic relationship towards. The mystery continues to build though in a way that is kind of almost unrelated to that, in that the diviners themselves start to disappear. And that's where we are now at this turning point of the book. And that's what I'm most interested in, because we've had little snippets and little hints that something is not entirely right beyond the mysterious aspect of their own lives that they know about. 6 knows that she doesn't remember her childhood. She knows that her past life basically was stripped away when she became a diviner, but there seems to be more to it that they're not being told. There are some gargoyles around the abbey that seem to work as combination bodyguards and assistants. But as we're going through the story, there may be also slightly prison guard captors. Alix has a particular relationship with one gargoyle who seems to think of her as a bit of a pet, and vice versa. And honestly, the gargoyle, who doesn't have a name at the moment, just is the gargoyle, he is my favourite character in this. The gargoyle definitely knows something that 6 doesn't, and I'm really interested in what that is. I want to know what the diviners, what has happened to these girls to get to this point, why they're being used to divine the future, how they're able to. I want to know why they're disappearing. I want to know a lot more about it. In that sense, I'm almost enjoying this more as a mystery novel than a fantasy or a romance, but that's fine. I'm having a great time. I'm utterly hooked, and I need to know what happens next. I'm really hoping though that the romance kicks off a little bit. I don't need it to be the main part, but if it's gonna be a romantasy, then I feel like the romance should be important. Otherwise, why is it there? So I'm really hoping that Rory, our knight, is gonna become a little bit more, I don't know, charming, but compelling, interesting, engaging as the story goes on. Rory did really grow on me over the course of the book. From around about the middle onwards, he becomes a little bit more vulnerable. He and 6 begin to bond a little bit more, the romance fleshes out, and he did win me over as a romantic lead. However, I'm gonna stick to my guns on this one and say that while I enjoyed The Night and the Moth, and I did, it would have been pretty much the same story and equally as enjoyable without the romantic storyline. So to be honest, if it was up to me and I was categorising this book, I wouldn't put it down as a romantasy. I would say that this is a fantasy novel with some incredible world building and with a really, really compelling mystery plotline that just so happens to have a fairly interesting love interest and I guess a nice romantic subplot, but I did not feel like the romance was equal to the weighting of the fantasy world, to the fantasy storyline. And I find that interesting that for this being such a romantasy darling, I didn't feel the romance was its strongest or on par with the fantasy element. That mystery of what had happened to those missing diviners, what the magic that surrounded the diviners and the omens was, Six's quest to discover those things, the journey she went on taking on the omens, exploring this fantastical kingdom, all of that was so compelling, and I thought more compelling than a romance that, to be honest, you could kind of see coming from the start. That's not to say that this wasn't a brilliant book, it was. I probably rate this somewhere in the 4 range, and the ending is just, it was unexpected and it was intriguing, and I definitely want to pick up the next book. So The Night and the Moth is a big success, but like The Everlasting, I'm not so sure that this fully fits what I would consider a fantasy romance to be. The Everlasting, the time travel aspect was interesting, the almost repetition of their lives was interesting, but the romance was by far the more compelling part. It was more of a romance with strong time travel fantasy elements. This one almost flips the script on that, and it's very much a fantasy with a really compelling quasi-historical world building and an interesting enough romantic subplot. The same way a lot of fantasy novels are. I don't know that I would say the fantasy and the romance in either of these books have been, you know, up to the par of the other element, if that makes sense. So both definitely 4-star reads. There's just something not scratching the itch that I need to come out and go, that is a 5-star. So close, and honestly I don't know with The Night and the Moth what element I would change to give it that extra shot. I loved the gargoyle in this. The gargoyle is my favourite character, and we got some really nice revelations towards the end of the book, and I'm hoping that maybe we will see more development there in the sequel. All of that leads me to the last book that I have earmarked for this vlog, Shield of Sparrows. This has very much of the 3 been the one that I have seen billed as, I think, the most kind of, I don't want to say traditional romantasy because that's not a genre that's been around for that long, but I think the most mainstream romantasy. So I'm thinking it's going to hit the romance and fantasy more equally than the other two, and hopefully it'll just have whatever that spark I need it is, and this will be the 5-star, hopefully. So I'm still fairly early doors in Shield of Sparrows, but this is far more like what I guess just where I personally have put romantasy in my mind. This feels like what I expect something marketed as romantasy to be. We have the underappreciated princess, we have the multiple potential romantic interests, we have that antagonistic relationship between the princess and the potential love interests. That doesn't mean I'm going to like it more or less than either of the other 2 books, it's just more what I thought I was getting. As I said, I'm not that far through it, but my main takeaway at the moment is that why is everyone so mean to Odessa? Why, like, I get the premise is that Odessa is the princess, or a princess, the oldest princess in this kingdom. But the way the inheritance cycle goes is that every now and again, the royal family of her kingdom and the royal family of this other kingdom form a marriage alliance because this other kingdom protects her kingdom from these horrific eldritch monster type things. Odessa's father has been grooming her younger half-sister to be the bride of this alliance. But when the prince and his entourage arrive, they say that there's been some difference in that usually they only kill 7 of the monsters, and this year they killed 8 or something along those lines, and therefore the treaty allows that he pick which of the princesses he marries rather than taking the king's choice, and so obviously he picks the protagonist. My father's not happy about this because it turns out he's been grooming the sister to be an assassin or a spy, and now his plan has been turned upside down. But to add to this, in the marriage contract that Odessa has to sign, there's some kind of like blood magic type clause where she can't injure, harm, kill this prince that she's marrying. And so she's now being shipped off, and we're gonna see how it goes. And I just think, like, all of that's fine, but it's the way they talked about her, especially her father and her stepmother. There was a very idea that this notion that Odessa's kind of useless, she's the second choice. I'm like, why is she the second choice? Why do they so clearly favour the other sister for this? Why was Odessa never trained to be this assassin spy princess? It doesn't make sense to me. Also, they're dyeing her, I think, red hair brown constantly, and it seems to again be kind of like reference. I think the red is her mother's hair colour, but it feels more important than that in this moment, and I don't. There's lots going on that I do not understand, but I am along for the ride. I'm having a good time with it. If nothing else, it has very much kind of ingratiated the protagonist to me, because I'm just like, I want her to do well. I want her, if she wants to kill a man, I want her to have what she wants, because she needs her little wins. I come to you with maybe not the most exciting of updates. Choices were made, and I've decided to DNF Shield of Sparrows. I dithered on this quite a long time. I kept trying to push through more. I spoke to some people on Discord who had already read it. There are so many rave reviews of this, and specifically people that I trust their opinions on have loved it, and the overwhelming kind of consensus on Goodreads, on Storygraph, does seem to be that this is one of the best romantasies of last year. But it just wasn't for me. I was listening to it on the audiobook, and quite frankly, when it was time to pick up an audiobook, I genuinely found myself looking for other things to do. I was like, maybe I'll just listen to a CD at the moment in the car. Maybe I'll read a book before bed instead of listening to something. I just was putting it off and putting it off. I wasn't excited to go back to it. And then when I was listening to it, it was the most passive listening to an audiobook that you could do. I was taking in the story, but I wasn't really absorbing it. I don't know. It sounds stupid to say it like that, but I wasn't excited about it. I wasn't having a bad time, but I wasn't having a good time. I wasn't having any kind of time. I did say at the start of the year that this was the year where I would be decisive and I would DNF as soon as I thought that I'm not going to get any more enjoyment than I'm currently getting from the book. And I think I passed that point on Shield of Sparrows several hours ago. Like, yes, I'm still really interested in Odessa, in the mystery of why everyone's so obsessed with her hair. I'm still quite interested in why her family just don't seem to like her very much, even though they clearly love her. They just don't trust her or like any of that. But the thing is that we've left all those characters behind, so I don't know if or when we would get a resolution on that. And the story that we're currently telling, the characters we're currently following, I just don't care about. I just don't care. So I've decided to stick to my guns and I'm going to DNF it. I'm not going to force myself through. I think there's at least more than half, and honestly, that it's not worth it. So I'm going to call that one. And I guess that's me wrapping up the vlog here then, which is very anticlimactic. I was hoping that we were going to have me say that the Everlasting had the romance but maybe didn't have as much fantasy as I wanted. The Night in the Moth had all of the fantasy story elements I wanted, but the romance didn't blow me away. And then I was going to come back in and go, this one got both right. And that's not where I am. It does have a very complex world. If you're invested and if you're enjoying the story, then the world building does seem to have quite a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of characters, there's the different countries, there's quite a lot of history between these characters. And I suppose if you're interested in the romance, then the characters are spending a lot of time together. You're getting to see it's very enemies to lovers. At the moment where I am, there's almost a love triangle, but from what I've seen online, that resolves itself in a slightly unusual way. So I guess if you're enjoying the romance, then there's a lot going on there. It's just not grabbed me personally, so I'm gonna call it. But I did have a good time with this vlog, and I knocked off 3 books that I have been really wanting to read. I keep putting them on TBRs, I keep saying that I'm going to try them, I see amazing reviews of them. I really wanted to be part of that, and I did find 2 that I really enjoyed. The Everlasting is definitely going to stick with me. The romance was beautiful, the story was really well constructed, and although I think me and Alix E. Harrow's books and her writing in general doesn't grab me consistently, which might just be the way it is. I have the same issue with V.E. Schwab, so maybe it's just she's not an author that I'm ever going to come out adoring, but I can really appreciate what the book did, and like I say, it's going to be one that I think back on. The Night and the Moth, I had a great time with it. I was really churning through the pages. I was so invested in that mystery, even if I wasn't completely grabbed by the romance. And I definitely want to pick up the second book in that duology, and I want to go and read the One Dark Window books that I currently have sitting. So both of those were major successes, and Shield of Sparrows, at least I've tried it. I really hope that you have got something out of this really wishy-washy video, and if you want to try and sell me on Shield of Sparrows, you're more than welcome to do it in the comments. If you have anything to say about the other 2 books, obviously I'm also happy to hear that. And if you don't have anything in particular you want to say, then leave me a moth or a butterfly. I don't know if we have moth. Leave me maybe something like that in the comments. And hopefully I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.